Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Come on. There we go. All right, we got a crowded room today. We got to bring some liveliness here. So this is the February 1st, 2023 meeting of the Board of Estimates. It's now called to order. As the board continues to meet in hybrid format, we'll ask all those who are participating with us in person to ensure that you have a mask on at all times. That is still current City Hall policy. And we also ask that you mute your phones, electronic devices, or turn them off. For those who are with us live, please make sure that your devices as well as are on mute. The board will call on you at that time if you could state your name, where you're coming from, and proceed with your testimony. At this time, I will ask our amazing clerk, Ms. Celeste Amato, for any corrections, additions, or noted abstentions to today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, everyone. We have the following changes and corrections to note this morning for the agenda on page 13. Item number SB 2310196, Fire Department, please delete action requested as shown and replace with approve the first modification to Emergency Service Transporter Supplemental Payment Program from Maryland Department of Health. We're also correcting the period of the agreement to reflect October 1st, 2020 through September 30th, 2026. This modification went into effect November 1st, 2022. On page 113, Bureau of Procurement, payment of outstanding invoices with Selectron Technologies, Inc. In background explanation under requisition number, it currently reads Health Department. Please delete and replace with the Department of Housing and Community Development. We have the following deferrals and withdrawals to note this morning. On page 113, Bureau of Procurement, payment of outstanding invoices, Selectron Technologies, Inc. This item is being deferred until March 1st, 2023 at the request of the Comptroller. On page 141 through 142, Bureau of Procurement, contract number 8000, Motorola Radio Equipment Master Purchase Agreement is being deferred until March 1st, 2023 at the request of the Board President. On page 159 through 160, Department of Public Works, WC 1315, Hillen and Penn Lucy North Neighborhoods Water Main Replacement. This item is being deferred until February 15th, 2023 at the request of the Comptroller. And on page 181 through 182, Department of Transportation, contract TR 16020, Comprehensive Conduit Facilities Management Services. This item is being deferred until March 1st, 2023 at the request of the President. The following items are on the non-routine agenda this morning. Page number 7, Department of Audits, Biennial Performance Audit of Planning Commission and Department of Planning capital budgeting processes for the fiscal years ending June 30, 2021 and June 30, 2020. On page 6, Department of Audits, Biennial Performance Audit of the Department of Human Resources for Family Medical Leave Act and Americans with Disabilities Act for the fiscal years ending June 30, 2021 and June 30, 2020. On page 11, Department of Finance, insurance renewal with Chubb and AXA-XL Insurance Companies. On page 89, Department of Law, settlement agreement and release. On page 156, Department of Public Works, WC 1412, urgent need infrastructure rehabilitation and improvements, phase 3, FY 21. Statements have been received from Metra Industries and R.E. Harrington Plumbing and Heating Company, Inc. On page 157 through 158, Department of Public Works, SC 1027, rehabilitation and improvements to sanitary sewers at various locations in Baltimore City. A statement was received from Metra Industries. We have the following abstentions to note this morning. The Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott is abstaining on page 23, Department of Health, ratification to provider agreement with Johns Hopkins University. The Honorable President Nick Mosby has no abstentions this morning. The Honorable Bill Henry is abstaining on the following travel requests, page 109, page 161, and page 162. City Solicitor Ebony Thompson has no abstentions this morning. Director of Public Works Jason Mitchell has no abstentions this morning. We have the following no votes on routine agenda items to note. On behalf of Council President Nick Mosby, he is voting no on pages number 101, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, subrecipient grant agreement with Carey Cares Foundation, Inc. On page 102, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, African Diaspora with Alliance LLC. Page 103, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, subrecipient grant with agreement Brown Girl Wellness. Page 105, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, subrecipient grant agreement with Community Law in Action. Page 106, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, subrecipient grant agreement with No Boundaries Coalition, Inc. And on page 107, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, subrecipient grant agreement with No Struggle, No Success. That concludes our opening remarks this morning.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the opening statement.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The opening statement is now adopted. I would like to now direct everyone's attention to a memorandum from my office dated January 30th, 2023, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items together with any corrections, additions, abstentions, and no votes that have been noted by our clerk. I will entertain a motion at this time
So moved.
to move the
Second.
routine agenda. It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda is adopted. The first item on the non-routine agenda can be found on page 7. That's SB 2210080, Department of Audits reports. The audits are for the biannual performance audit for the Department of Planning for fiscal years ending June 30th, 2021 and June 30th, 2020. The board is requested to note receipt of the audit report at this time. I'll turn it over to our auditor. Mr. Auditor Josh Pash, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, honorable board members. My name is Josh Pash. I am the City Auditor. I am here to present the biennial performance audit for Department of Planning. Today, I'll present the audit objectives and scope, the City Code Article 1, our findings, and the overall risks. Our audit objectives and scope were to evaluate the Planning Commission and Department of Planning's capital budgeting process to determine how Baltimore City prioritizes capital projects, specifically whether the funds are distributed equitably. Next slide, please. And we are covering fiscal years 21 and 20. Next slide, please. Okay. Our methodology, we researched and reviewed Ordinance 180223, the Equity Assessment Program, Baltimore City Code Article 1, Subtitle 39, the Equity Assessment Program. We looked at the equity processes, equity plans, and equity reports of other cities and counties. We also interviewed key individuals from Department of Planning, DHCD, Department of Transportation, DPW, to obtain an understanding of their policies and procedures and their systems that govern the capital improvement program process. We also identified related risks and evaluated internal controls over the administration of the capital improvement program. To summarize, City Code Article 1, Subtitle 39, the Equity Assessment Program. So some of the requirements that we looked at were city agencies are to develop and implement an equity action plan to incorporate and embed equity principles and strategies into city operations, programs, services, and policies. The Director of Planning is to conduct an equity assessment on any proposed capital budget and score the proposed budget based on that assessment. The results of each proposed capital budget should be published on the Department of Planning's website. Some definitions. Equity is defined as, this is the definition by the city. Equity is defined as closing the gaps in policy, practice, and allocation of city resources so that race, gender, religion, sexual orientations, and income do not predict one's success while also improving outcomes for all. And equity assessment is defined, and that's as required by Article 1, is a systematic process of identifying policies and practices that may be implemented to identify and redress disparate outcomes on the basis of race, gender, and income. For our first finding, we noted that the criteria used to evaluate capital improvement program projects based on equity requires improvement. We noted that a formal citywide process to evaluate capital budget submissions based on equity and other factors was not in place in fiscal years 21 and 20 as required by the City Code article. The Planning Commission and Department of Planning did develop an evaluation criteria and scoring guide as of September 31, 2021, and Department of Planning tested that criteria during fiscal year 22, and they implemented them in fiscal year 23. Department of Planning did not weigh the criteria to focus on equity and outcomes, therefore we found it to be incomplete as related to these laws. Our first recommendation is that the Planning Commission and DOP revise the evaluation criteria and scoring guide to weight equity outcomes in scoring each criteria and facilitate continuity throughout the city. For finding 2, we noted that the process to measure and report the distribution of capital projects based on equity is not complete. We noted that the current equity reporting process is incomplete. It does not adequately reflect the true picture of distribution of CIP budget across community statistical areas or city neighborhoods and the related disparities. Specifically, the current equity reporting is comprised of 60% of the CIP budget submitted by agencies through the ordinance of estimate. So basically, only 60% of our capital program runs through this process that's evaluated for equity. The other 40% of the agency CIP budget is basically for contingency and also includes subsequent transfers between CSAs that occur after the ordinance of estimates are not captured and reported based upon equity and actual use. So basically 40% of our budget is not allocated and evaluated. That is to address things that come up during the year. And then we also noted that any transfers between what was budgeted to new programs or to increase existing CIP is not also caught in this equity analysis. We noted that a monitoring process was not established to validate whether budgeted project services are performed within a designated CSA. So basically to see that they are delivered into the area where they were budgeted. And then the current counting system does not support reporting of capital projects expenditures by location in order to support a overall report of actual expenditures. The recommendations for finding 2 is that we recommend that the Planning Commission and Department of Planning establish a process to require agencies to submit an equity analysis for all capital projects that exclude a CSA through the ordinance of estimates and indicate the actual capital funding use. In other words, if the contingency fund is allocated to a certain project, they would evaluate the equity on that. Non-equity based projects, for instance, if they have a consent decree, which is required and doesn't go through the evaluation, and any emergency projects, to basically perform an equity analysis on those, even though they may be required by consent decree. We also recommend that they capture and report the results, including transfers submitted by the agencies. In other words, a look back to see what actually happened, if it was different from the budget, and then also to cover the contingencies and emergency that do not run through the ordinance of estimates. And then to work with the Department of Finance to determine whether the CSA or location information can be captured on that so that that would assist with the reporting of actual results. For finding 3, we noted that the opportunity to strengthen city residential engagement in the capital budgeting process currently exists, but there's opportunities to improve it. We noted that the methodology for engagement of city residents in the capital budget development is decentralized, mostly happening by specific and individual agencies. It's limited in nature, and it is not consistently applied across all agencies. So when equity is a consideration in development of the capital budget, formal citywide policies and procedures have not been developed to formally engage residents across the equity spectrum in the selection of projects, which may result in diminished awareness and may not completely capture an equitable opportunity and distribution. Our recommendations is that the Planning Commission and DOP develop formal citywide policies and procedures that engage citizens across the city in the beginning of the capital budget process, and that they include documenting and evaluating recommendations from citizens based on equity. And this is applicable to both agencies. So basically, when we do have that community engagement, that is documented so that it can be tracked. Finding 4. We noted that a citywide equity plan to focus the limited resources on underserved communities and assess outcomes does not exist. As I mentioned before, most of the process happens at the agency level. The city does not have a formal citywide equity plan to manage the equitable distribution of limited resources. That also focuses allocation to close the gap in historically redlined or underfunded communities. The current equity-based capital process is decentralized. Each agency performs an equity analysis, allocates its capital budget based on the information it accumulates at the agency level, and that is what is used to determine the neighborhoods that will receive capital funding and are analyzed based on equity. Our recommendation is that the Office of Equity and Civil Rights, which is citywide, develop a citywide plan to target underserved communities and close the related gaps. And then from an overall perspective, without a citywide equity plan, a city cannot effectively establish goals on a citywide level and measure related outcomes on a citywide level. Current equity reporting is inaccurate and incomplete, and it excludes adequate input from city residents across the equity spectrum, and that could affect management decision in making for distribution of city funds. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much. At this time, are there any questions from the board? Mr. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning.
Good morning.
There's a clear inference available, but I just want to make it absolutely explicit. When you're recommending that the Office of Equity develop a citywide equity plan, which I know that they're already in the process of doing, you're also recommending that the Planning Commission and the Department of Planning use that plan for their capital budgeting purposes. Is that?
So looking at this from both the macro or the citywide and the agency level, we realized that the agency is going to be the subject matter expert. However, we noted that there's not a citywide direction to look at citywide. So what the recommendation is to basically merge those, which would be a collaboration between the Office of Equity and the agencies, but would also give the city an overall direction for compliance with the ordinance.
So Department of Planning and the Planning Commission should work with the Office of Equity to use the Office of Equity's equity plan in coming up with their capital budget recommendations.
That would seem to be the most effective way.
Okay, I know it's I just want to make that really clear for anybody who's watching or reading that that's what we're saying, because I'm going to be saying that to Mr. Ryer and Ms. Moore shortly. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this time, are there any additional questions from the board? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Auditor. Director Ryer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. President, Mr. Controller, and the board. I'm going to respond to the audit report itself rather than the PowerPoint, and I'll go recommendation by recommendation and then turn it over to Director Moore. In general, we don't disagree with any of these recommendations. As you know, the Planning Department back in 2015 started internally looking at equity in a very serious and introspective way. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how that has evolved over the years. As far as our team goes, I'd like to introduce Assistant Director Stephanie Smith, who I believe is on the screen. She was hired since 2015 specifically as the Assistant Director for Equity and Communication. We also have Sarah Parnillum, the Director of Policy and Data Analysis, and Kristen Ahern is the actual person that does the capital budget every year. It really is, and the end of the day, comes down to one person. So I think Stephanie is on the line to give an overview of what the department's been doing in terms of equity.
At this time,
sorry.
Deputy Smith, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you fine.
Okay, good, great. Good morning to everyone. Good morning to the entire panel. It's an honor to be here before you today. As my director mentioned, in early 2015, the Department of Planning just internally went upon a path of just wanting to be better grounded in concepts of equity, not just generally, but specifically in the context of what it means, the history of inequity in the city of Baltimore. As we all know, later that spring, after the death of Freddie Gray and the uprising, there was a general commitment that was expanded across the city to delve into issues of equity more robustly. But for our agency specifically, it just reaffirmed a commitment that already began before that. So the agency organically, this was not a top-down initiative. It was a staff-driven initiative to establish an equity committee that embarked on not only kind of self-inquiry, but also participated in a host of equity trainings as a collective and as individuals to better enhance their understanding of how we could expand our agency's functions around issues of equity in a very systematic way and in a very deliberate way. And the work product that came out of that equity committee was an equity action plan, of which there are 5 parts. And notably, one of the pillars is to conduct an equity analysis of the capital budget. And the reason why that was a primary feature of the equity action plan is that it was one of the ways as an agency we could touch upon and influence conversations and activities around equity more broadly because of our interaction with other agencies through the capital budget process. In 2017, working with a fellow from Morgan State University, we were able to release the initial findings of a preliminary analysis of our capital budget, where not very surprisingly, we noted there were a lot of significant data gaps in terms of what was being included in agency requests for capital dollars. Oftentimes there were requests that were comprising large geographic locations, batch requests that did not have the specific addresses and locations that made it easier to map out where these investments would later happen. So that preliminary analysis really gave us a sense of where we needed to dig deeper and better support our sister agencies in getting more increased upfront data about where these investments would actually be happening. Subsequent to that preliminary analysis, we were able to also participate in 2018 in a public deliberation. It was a bit of an unorthodox one that was initiated and convened by the New York Academy of Medicine through a fellowship that I participated in solely to figure out how to better refine our agency's approach to capital and equity through the Fulcrum Fellowship. I gained a relationship that led us to this public deliberation where we worked with the capital planners from all agencies that participate in the capital budget to not only evaluate how we could improve our policies as it pertains to capital and equity, but to specifically assess these investments through a health equity lens under the premise that investments in the built environment have public health impacts. That was, I think, a really great opportunity to initially get our capital planners outside of the respective silos of their agencies to see their portfolio of investment requests across agencies as having synergistic opportunities for specific parts of our city. And so the next genesis of the equity analysis as it pertains to the CIP was the equity assessment law that was referenced earlier, obviously established later in 2018. So the combination of this equity compliance measure along with our multi-year effort to better refine and get more data specificity as it pertains to investments at both the local community level and those that have more of a regional or citywide impact. As you can imagine, investments being made in bridges, being made in reservoirs and of the like have a much greater impact than the specific geography in which they were placed. So we were further refining our approach to tease out citywide, regional investments from those that are more most appropriately felt at the community level. From there, we were able to work with our CIP planners across agencies and with members of the staff of the Office of Equity and Civil Rights under a prior leadership model to pilot another way of scoring that wasn't just happening solely with the Department of Planning evaluating for issues of equity, public health, and the like, but also getting fellow colleagues to cross-score investments so that we were really looking at how all of these investments interact with one another. bringing us to today's presentation, we definitely appreciate the support and the feedback that was provided today about ways that we can continue to improve our approach to equity, because honestly, we are in a moment where we oftentimes have capacity to most appropriately synthesize equity considerations into the appropriation of the dollars, but do not necessarily always have the same staff capacity for the post-appropriation reality of where those dollars go. But I do want to mention two things that were mentioned in the prior presentation that I think are points of clarification that would be needed by the Board of Estimates. One, when it was discussed that approximately 40% of those budgeted, that they don't have, locations, or rather they are contingencies. They're not exactly just contingencies. They're often very important programming like demolition, home repair, things that you cannot always at the outset outlay where those locations are going to be at the appropriations phase, but they're very important work that is done later based on other factors that cannot always be anticipated at the appropriations phase. And then also, I think it's important to lift up that those projects that are falling into consent decrees, they are already evaluated for equity if they have location data, and oftentimes something under a consent decree often will have location data. So I just want to clarify that the 40% that were characterized as contingencies aren't purely contingencies. They're very important projects like housing demo, repair, and things of that nature. And then also that we do evaluate consent decree projects that have location data. I think one of the important things to lift up about the outreach related to the to the CIP, is that it was really important for us as an agency to ensure that in order for people to provide quality input that can help their communities, we need to do a better job of explaining to them how to interact with this system itself. That's why one of the other pillars of our 5-part action plan is about ensuring that we are engaging with communities that otherwise have had diminished voice, to ensure that we are not leaving very important residents' perspectives off the table. So there's a few ways that we've currently gone about expanding the ability for us to facilitate the concerns of those community members. And I want to just give a couple of highlights there. So as you can imagine, we have an equity lens that informs our work. Because we're a member of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, as a city that was one of the first cities in the nation to have a sustainability director, we are using their 4-part lens that we think is not only accessible, but highly relevant to the work of our agency. We look at, particularly as it pertains to the CIP, we're looking at how are the investments we're making, how are they impacted by structural inequity, how are they impacted by procedural inequity. Procedural is, I think, where the feedback related to engagement is most pronounced. Also, distributional equity. I think many times we're looking at how power and resources are distributed across geography, but also across populations. Baltimore City is a highly racially segregated city, and oftentimes investments evaluated for geography can even serve as somewhat of a proxy for investments across populations. And then lastly, we look at distributional equity. Our transgenerational, equity. Are we placing undue burdens on future generations of Baltimoreans because their considerations and voice are not being interwoven in a deliberate fashion into the recommendations and policy decisions that we make? And transgenerational equity is important here because investments in the built environment are investments we're often going to be living with for many decades and generations to come. And so as it pertains to procedure, one of the ways that we enhance the ability for community members in Baltimore City to participate in the offense on issues related to the capital budget is through, we did a series of pop-ups. This was in a pre-COVID context where we went to communities themselves, and we brought the CIP planners from respective agencies to community. So it was almost a mixer / almost a speed dating of sorts, where community members would get to kind of break through the opaque and often vague systems of how you would penetrate an agency and figure out who do I need to talk to let them know about a capital improvement that my community association, community organization, or block have been wrestling with for some time. Even in a post-COVID context, we brought some of those situations that were happening in person to online capacity. We've continued to maintain those online engagements at least twice a year. But we also knew that it was important to dig a bit deeper. And through the launch of the Planning Academy, which the 7th cohort is going to be launching this spring, we've trained over 240 residents across the city, every council district in the city is represented. And what's important about this is we focus on explaining and teasing out not only how the capital budget works through the context of the Planning Academy, but we also discuss it, how it interacts with the operating budget. And I think that's something that goes under discussed, and something I want to lift up with our colleagues from the Department of Finance is that the investments we make in the built environment have impacts on how we're evaluating the strength and the impact of the operating budget. I always give the example of if you have an undersubscribed Zumba class at a senior center, it could be easy to say that that's just a program that shouldn't happen because no one wants to participate. But under further analysis, perhaps there's physical issues with that building that make it less enticing, less inviting, less likely to attract the very population that would want to participate, but just not in that building, just not there. So we think that it's important that we're in our engagement, not just discussing the CIP in isolation from the other programming and operating investments we make as a city, but to look at it as a constellation of investments that interact with one another. And the Planning Academy gives us that opportunity to go deeper with community leaders. And we know those investments we've made in enhancing the understanding of those 240 residents has gone well beyond those residents as they've articulated their needs for the people that they represent with capital budget planners, not only within our agency, but also across agencies that feed into the request for the CIP. So I want to leave you with these few things in mind. One, the journey to embed equity considerations into the capital budget precedes the ordinance at issue. And we're very proud of that. This is a situation where we feel as a tiny but mighty agency, we were able to influence the larger government overall through our leadership with the capital budget. But we know that with continued partnership with the Office of Equity and Civil Rights and continued refinement of those strategies in partnership with not only those assembled before us with DOE, but the sister agencies that participate, we can continue to make, I think, strides that will demonstrate not only to those assembled here, but to the city that we take issues of equity incredibly seriously as it comes to the capital budget. But we want to make sure that we're looking at this as a portfolio of investments and not simply a series of one-offs. One of the things that we've also piloted with elected officials and those agency staffers is kind of a mini version of the Planning Academy. We hope to relaunch that for the benefit because it's not enough for the rank and file community to have enhanced understanding of the capital budget. We feel like every level of government represented in Baltimore could have an enhanced understanding so that they could improve their advocacy voice and improve and refine their approach to getting the investments that are desperately needed within our city. So equity has been at the forefront of a conversation around the capital budget for the Department of Planning for the better part of 7 years. And we are continuing to refine the engagement piece, especially in light of the challenges of recent years where engaging with the public has meant being more flexible and having many more modes of communication. And we welcome the partnership and opportunity to continue to improve in that realm because we don't believe the job is ever done there. There's always a way that we can continue as a city and as an agency to better communicate with our residents and constituents. But I think it's very important for those assembled to know that for us, it's not just how many people you engage, it's the quality of the engagement. And for us, we've been very focused on having not just shallow engagement, but deeper engagement that goes to the heart of people understanding how they can really participate in the CIP in a very real way and not just a surface way. And so I want to give an opportunity for those assembled to ask questions if they have any, but then also I know that I have my colleagues that are present in the room that can also give additional details as well. Thank Thank you.
Thank you. Are you going to go finding by finding, or was that?
I can, yes, I can. I was planning to do that. It'll be short.
All right, yeah, just go over and let us know, I guess, your
And
response
then
by finding.
I just have one
Thank you so
other-
much, Deputy Smith.
So I think it's fair to say in all three recommendations that apply to the planning department, we agree with them, with certain caveats. The first one is that we revised the evaluation criteria and scoring guide, brought copies of the evaluation criteria. This is an ongoing process for us. They are relatively new in this process that we've gone through to reevaluate the capital budget. We would like to put some thought into this. We would like to look at what other cities do. Other cities look at equity differently. They also look at capital budgets differently. So we would like to spend a little time looking at this. To the controller's point, we would look to put out an RFI this year that would help quantify the cost of hiring an expert consultant on this. Once we had a cost, then we could develop a budget around that. So that's essentially our response to the first one. And the second one, too, we work very closely with the Department of Finance. As you may or may not know, the amount of unrestricted funding in the capital budget is only in the ballpark of $100 million a year. And that has no relation at all to the needs of the capital budget. Most of the agencies are very good at documenting their deferred maintenance needs, and I can assure you they are over $2 billion at this point. But we're hopeful that Department of Finance, through their improvements to tracking systems, to the introduction of Workday, that we can start to put a finer lens on recommendation 2. And recommendation 3, I think the Assistant Director talked a lot about engagement. And we agree. The department has been very aggressive with engagement. We have not worked with the 8 agencies that participate in the capital budget to increase the upfront engagement with the agencies before they submit their capital budget. I just maybe to state the obvious, when the Department of Transportation has almost no capital budget, as it has for the last 10 years. Most of their capital goes to matching federal funds for bridges. We don't want to raise expectations among community people. So until we can develop a more robust capital budget, and that, to the Assistant Director's point, of transgenerational equity is a point we really want to emphasize. It's not just about resolving the issues of the past. It's also about what kind of city we're passing down to the future. And if we underestimate in our city, as we are in a gross way, then our descendants will be paying the price of that. And that concludes my statement.
Thank you. At this time, are there any questions or concerns from members of the board? Ms. Comptroller, the floor is yours. Mr. Mayor, you would like to?
Bill, go ahead. Bill probably has a lot more than me.
Good morning.
Morning.
A couple things. First of all, I know, and this is more to clarify something that I think audits recommended, which was that you engage residents at the beginning of the capital budgeting process, which would have an implementation date of September 2023. I would just like to point out, this is the first year that the City Council will be able to move money around in the budget during budget season. And so the more you can collect and incorporate direct constituent and community information and input, the less likely the community folk are going to go to their council people and ask for changes in the capital budget this spring. So even though technically the recommendation is to start in September, I'm just pointing out you might save yourself some grief if there's a way to do that sooner. I would also, you made reference to this, and this isn't directly to the point of this audit, but we may want to follow up in terms of if you have data from DOT. You said the agencies have been good in providing you with their deferred capital need. We may be following up on what information DOT has provided you over the recent years on the deferred capital need for maintaining our conduit system.
Oh, okay.
And then the last point I think I have here, and this is also a question for Ms. Moore for when she comes up. If the Department of Equity and Civil Rights is, as I believe, already in the process of identifying a consultant to do a citywide equity plan, why does planning need to put out an RFI to find out how much that will cost? And why would planning engage a second consultant to do a second plan when that would inevitably lead to potential discrepancies between what you're trying to do with capital budgeting and what the Department of Equity and Civil Rights is going to be doing in terms of making recommendations to agencies to what you do and to their operating budgets?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it's a good point. We could participate in the office's study. We'd have to have some discussions with the consultant about sort of the nature of the capital budget. As you may know, like, we have tried to compare ourselves to other cities, and every city does the capital budget differently. So
Oh yeah, I'm not encouraging or recommending that you not get the information you need. I'm just encouraging you to make sure you tell the Department of Equity what information you need them to include in their plan to make sure you and Delegate Deputy can do the work you're doing as effectively and efficiently as possible.
we'd be glad to do
Okay,
that.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Director. Thank you, Delegate Deputy, and the entire team. First, Mr. Comptroller, that's exactly how it will happen. Planning and equity will work together on the proposal. Mr. Director, can you just I think for residents of Baltimore who are watching today, they have heard you all talk. They've heard my very intelligent, diligent delegate, Deputy Director talk. But for them, they may want to have some simple, smaller versions. Can you tell me about specific projects that happened through the capital budget that were raised up because of the equity scoring and the planning process that you guys have put in place?
I can give you a very personal example. Department of General Services, which maintains our real estate portfolio, our buildings, our vertical assets, receives in the capital budget $10–12 million a year, and they have demonstrated consistently over the years that their capital needs are about $60 million a year. So we're underfunding them by 80%. And when we apply, even when we apply an equity lens, a couple of years ago, I'll give as an example, the only submissions that we were able to fund for general services were roof projects, right? Roof projects are so basic, if you lose the roof, you lose the building. And not to mention we have a great surplus of real estate. One thing we had to do was to fund the exterior skin of this building. And we deferred that for many years. And then
We would have kept deferring if it was up for me, but keep going.
and then it was broken down into multiple phases so that we did not divert necessary money from neighborhood buildings that needed to be done, or health and safety, like the HVAC issues in the libraries we've just experienced last summer, to the city hall structure itself. That's a pretty good example, I think, of how we have tried to push the capital budget out into the neighborhoods as much as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any other questions? Director, I've spoken to your team and you about this in the past. I think that we're looking at this the wrong way. I think we're looking at it through a equality lens versus an equity lens. And I say that because I consistently hear about what's in front of us and doing the comparison and understanding and knowing that there is some proportional discussion to ensure that from an equality perspective, we are implementing capital projects. But if we're not looking at it from an introspective, if we're not looking at the policies that the planning department and many of these agencies, and none of us were around, made, and the byproduct of economic apartheid, concentrated poverty, which spins off to the crime and the issues that we see in our communities today, then we're not really looking at it from an equity perspective. I know that the planning department, I believe, goes back to 2015 when we start to kind of analyze and look forward. But until we really look at the decisions that were made 20, 30, 40 years ago to create the conditions that we have today, then it's really hard for us to really consider that equity, particularly as it relates to conditions that folks are living in today. I know that the deputy delegate talked earlier about transgenerational, from a transgenerational equity perspective, and ensuring that the decisions that we're making today don't affect generations to come. Well, that is the same perspective that we need to look today to ensure that we're not compounding the racist, the policies driven through bigotry, the issues that have created the conditions of our city today, that we're not looking at that 20, 30, 40 years in retrospect to help us make the decisions that we're making today. So I know we've talked about this in the past. I haven't heard much about what we're attempting to do that, but I think all we're doing now is looking at it from an equality perspective and not an equity perspective.
Mr. President, can I speak?
Sure. Deputy Delegate would like to speak.
Just Assistant Director Stephanie Klein, or Stephanie. Thank you so much. I just wanted to jump in here. Thank you, Director. So the purpose of this audit was almost exclusively focused on our capital budget and equity. And I do want to assure you that our understanding of equity, we do not conflate equity and equality because they're not the same things. In fact, we've worked with some of our sister agencies who, in their approach to their requests for the CIP, we're often deploying an equality kind of approach, like having, kind of the same request for different quadrants of the city, for example, right? That's an equal request, but it's not necessarily equitable because the challenges are not obviously going to be the same in every quadrant of the city. But to speak specifically beyond to what you were mentioning, while we were focused on the CIP aspects of our equity action plan, two other pillars of our 5-pillar action plan are: one, evaluating city policies for their impact on inequity as they intersect with the work of the Department of Planning, and then also internally evaluating and revising our own policies as an agency. So there's no way we can affect change around equity just on a project by project basis. It's about reorienting the work of our agency. And so a very specific way that we are trying to address that within the commissions that we stand up, Planning Commission and Historic Preservation Commission specifically, is that we launched a work group within our agency of those staff members that most readily interact with those commissions to devise a path forward for incorporating a review of equity considerations in our staff reports. And so that is a very deliberate way that, though projects are being evaluated on a solitary basis, we wanted to include an equity profile that doesn't necessarily tell commissioners how to make a decision, but it gives them tools and insights that should inform the overall decisions they're making for agenda items before the Planning Commission and the Historic Preservation Commission. Now, what's important about that is that while you're going to have those individual components in the staff reports, it allows us to step back a year, 6 months or 2 years at a time and start to see trend lines and policy around types of decisions that are being made. In what instances are certain types of projects being approved and others being rejected, modified? When are certain things, happening or not? It's hard when you're looking at everything in the moment in a bite-sized way. But by having a continuum of equity considerations that are at least memorialized in staff reports, it allows us to have a more robust, reflective look back on what we're actually doing that's not just fueled by anecdote and feelings, but by patterns that we can more readily assess because of that. So there's actually a host of other similar approaches to reorienting our work that are very different than what we're focused on pursuant to the audit findings that were really focused on CIP and CIP engagement. So I just wanted to assure you that this is not the summation of our commitment around equity. We do understand the difference between equity and equality, and we are doing everything we can to operationalize it in a way that's not only meaningful, but sustainable and replicable across city government. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to add that clarification.
No, and thank you for expanding it beyond, I guess, what we're here to talk about today regarding these findings. Specific to capital improvement plan, that's where I want to kind of really address this equality versus equity perspective. And I think that what was really interesting is we talked about the deferred maintenance, and we talked about the issues around deferred maintenance in our department. We know many of that deferred maintenance was done because equality wasn't always done in the city of Baltimore. So when we talk about CIP and we talk about equity, it's really important that we look at the historic view of what wasn't done in the past. And I think that from specifically talking to members of your team, I think that maybe we do a look back to 2015 and forward, and I don't think that is sufficient when we're really talking about looking at this from an equity perspective. Maybe there's a determination from your department or the administration that, hey, so much has been done and the conditions are what they are, that we just have to look at it moving forward in an introspective perspective. And that's a word that you use. That's not a word that I use. You brought that word into this discussion today. And that's fine, but let's accept it for what it is. I think if we continue to utilize the word equity when we're talking about specific things like the capital improvement plan, then we must factor on the past and what wasn't done in the past to create the conditions of where we are today, and from a transgenerational perspective, ensure that we're not compounding that for the future.
Great, thank you. So I'd be very happy to work with the Office of Equity and Civil Rights and the Department of Finance to look back. It's a massive job.
It is. So, but what I'm saying is when we continue to throw around equity, either we're going to do that massive job or we're going to stop using the word equity, in my opinion. I mean, maybe you guys look at it from a different perspective, but I think that we have to factor in the past in order if we're really talking about, looking at equity moving forward.
I understand your point. We will look at that. Maybe we could modify our ROI to try to figure out what that would cost in terms of expertise with the Office of Civil Rights.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or concerns today on the board? Hearing
I'll
none.
go to Director Moore.
Oh, Director Moore, I'm so sorry.
More recommendation.
Madam CEO.
Good morning, Honorable Board. My name is Dana Peterson Moore. I'm the City of Baltimore's Chief Equity Officer, and I'm also the Director of the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. I want to wish everyone a very happy first day of Black History Month. Today, the Office of Equity and Civil Rights is honoring Justice Thurgood Marshall. Keeping with who was the first African-American Supreme Court member. Keeping with the law theme, I just want to recognize that in all of Baltimore's history, until today, there has never been an African-American woman, former acting city solicitor, presenting to a current woman, African-American acting city solicitor. History being made February 1, 2023.
Thank you so much, Director.
You're very welcome. Very proud of Ebony. So listen, equity versus equality, it is very, very clear. When I became the Chief Equity Officer, one of the first things that we did, and Mayor Scott will remember this, we convened a 2-day training of the mayor's entire cabinet. And one of the things that we highlighted was the distinction between equality, which we all feel like we want equality, but what we really want, what we really need is equity. And we trained on that. One of the very proud things that we like to report on is every city agency and almost every board and commission has an equity coordinator. One of the things that we've trained the equity coordinators to do is to begin to look at the policies that govern their work and to look back, as far back as those policies exist, and to ferret out those that are inequitable. And we actually train them on how to do this. How is that happening? How's it going? I think we need to have bring everyone back together and talk about that again. But for me, for where Karan and I sit, we really feel like we need to go back to when Baltimore established redlining. That's our history.
I love it.
That's our culture. That's where we begin. And you can drive, and I've shared, you can drive around Baltimore and still see the artifacts of that redlining, which is quite pernicious, but some of the artifacts still exist. That's how far back we need to go. Speaking of Karan is our Deputy Chief Equity Officer. We are supported also. Thank you, Karan. We too have a Dep-Del. We have Deputy Delegate Kalen Young, who's not here today because he's in Annapolis doing some really, really good work. And thank you to the offices of Mayor Scott. We now have 2 additional people fully dedicated to the equity work. Jordan Berry, who is building out the city's equity dashboard, which we can't wait to present that to you all, and Brandon Wofford, who is also an equity data analyst who started with our office on Monday. And we got more coming, more coming, but we need more. We are absolutely excited about working with Chris Ryer and the Department of Planning as we begin to find someone who can really help this city build an equity plan for this city. I had initially estimated that would cost between $100,000 and $250,000. Let's think north of that. I really think that our number is closer to $500,000. Working with the Casey Foundation to identify a perfect vendor. All that to say, we are in 100% agreement with recommendation 4 and have already begun to work on it. It's an exciting time for Baltimore. We are, I think, uniquely, exquisitely aware of the need for equity. We have been working on this actively since I've been in the office. I can see changes. It's really important to note, in all of the conversations that we have with the city agencies, the culture has changed. I don't have to bring up equity. I hear it offered. It comes up naturally, organically. And I believe very, very strongly that there is a real keen attention being paid on equity and making decisions that are equitable now. And we do need to worry about the future always. As you know, I've got a grandchild that's about the same age as your daughters, and we worry about the future. But I also worry about the past and what the past has built in our city and how we break down those structures. So that's what we're about. We're excited about it. I submitted a 7-page letter in response. I know you all don't want me to read that. I know that you have already read it.
Please read it to us.
No, you don't mean that.
You're not gonna-
So you're the kid that always said, but teacher, you didn't give us homework. Oh, Mr. President, it's there. It really lays out our position. I just want you to know that we're very excited about it. We need funding. We know that it's coming. We know that everyone's looking at this and supports, the request that we've made for additional funding.
Well, we appreciate you, Madam CEO. I think the one thing you said is there are a lot of folks using the word equity, but I think we use it in different formats. So I think I really appreciate your presentation today, as well as your letter, and understanding the importance of capturing the past data to help determine the decisions that we're making today to ensure we're doing it really in an equity manner. I know that is the aim of Director Ryer. As a council, we look forward to continuing to working with you guys and partner and maybe have a look back, have a check-in maybe in a couple months to just try to figure out where we are. Anything that the council can do to be supportive of that, we stand committed to supporting you as well as supporting planning moving forward. So when folks read about the former solicitor presenting in front of the current solicitor on this February 1st of 2023, this historic day, they'll understand and know that that was done just not in a performative fashion, but that was done with a real intentionality to ensure that we drive for equity in the city.
Absolutely.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. President, I think that as we were discussing, that the director just highlighted something for us that we think the comptroller is probably the best city hall historian that we have in City Hall.
Richard?
Yeah, I'll give him. No, Richard's not down here.
It's not here. It's just-
He's not here
So
today.
therefore, it's
So it counts. We believe this may be the first time in the history of the city that the entire board was actually African American, because typically either the DPW director or the solicitor, in one case recently, the mayor was not African American. So this might be history today.
Yeah, wow.
Indeed. It's what we do now and the history that we're experiencing right now. I mean, collectively, we're all experiencing it. It really lets everyone know your commitment is real. Your commitment is real. So is yours, and so is yours, and so is yours. And we believe that it takes all of us working together to make a change, and that's happening. I'm very, very proud of the work that we're doing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Are there any additional questions or concerns from Madam CEO? Mr. Comptroller?
I was going to say that I was going to ask you additional questions, but given when I was asking Director Ryer, I could clearly see you nodding your head in agreement with what I was going to say. I'm going to stipulate to the cooperation between the two agencies being mutual, and thank you so much for your service.
Absolutely. I don't play poker because it's all on my face. But just want to close by thanking Mayor Scott for making sure that I was able to do this work, and we're excited about it. And yes, it is so stipulated that the cooperation is there.
Well, thank you so much. With that, we will note this item and move on to our next. The next non-routine agenda item can be found. Thank you so much, planning. Can be found on page 6, SB 2310264, Department of Audits, Audits Report. The audits report are for the biennial performance audit, Department of Human Resources for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021 and June 30th, 2022. The board is requested to note this report. Today we have Deputy Auditor, Ms. Tunji Mung. Is that right? Got it right for the first time, all right? Actually, Mr. Auditor came before me and gave me your name, so. But going forward, we'll have it. But at this time, Deputy Auditor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Controller, Madam City Solicitor, and Director Mishra. My name is Lindy Mao. I'm the Deputy City Auditor. I am here to present the biannual performance audit of the Department of Human Resources. This is the second report that we are bringing to the board, and it is related to the Family Medical Leave Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. Next slide, please. I will go over audit objectives and scope, methodology, scope limitation, findings, and recommendations. Next slide. Our audit objectives were to evaluate whether FMLA and ADA requests are processed consistently across city agencies and whether city agencies are following the city policies and procedures and federal regulations. The scope of the audit was fiscal years 2021 and 2020, and we selected 4 key agencies, which are Baltimore Police Department, Department of Human Resources, Department of Public Works, and Department of Transportation. Next slide. The methodologies that we used were we researched and reviewed the respective federal regulations and cities' administrative manual associated with FMLA and ADA. We also researched the Baltimore City Charter and federal regulations in regards to the HIPAA privacy law. We also interviewed key individuals from the 4 key agencies that I mentioned before. We also conducted site visit at BPD, DHR, DPW, and DOT. We judgmentally selected samples and reviewed supporting documentation to determine whether all required documents were reviewed, approved, secured, and maintained. While doing that, our assessments was not independent because we had limited access to FMLA and ADA documents due to HIPAA privacy concerns. We were asked to provide a list of selected samples to agencies, and we were provided selected samples with certain redacted information. Next slide. Finding number 1, documentation of compliance with FMLA and ADA are not consistently maintained. 3 of 4 key agencies were not able to provide FMLA and ADA documentation for some of the samples selected for review. This increases the risk of non-compliance with federal records retention criteria for both FMLA and ADA. Next slide, please. This table is a summary of audit results for FMLA samples. Our scope was from December 2020 to November 2022. We look at the FMLA processes after Workday was implemented in December 2020. As you can see in the table, Police Department was not able to provide certifications of healthcare providers for 2 of 8 selected employees, and DPW was not able to provide the Fit for Duty certification for 1 of 8 employees. Next slide, please. This second table is a summary of audit results for ADA processes. ADA processes are still manual, and the processes are not in Workday yet. We look at 2 fiscal years, 2020 and 2021. For F1 2021, BBD was not able to provide any documentation for all 8 employees selected for review. For 2020, BBD was able to provide healthcare professional certifications, but not ADA request forms and functional capabilities assessment forms. The latter is the documentation to evidence supervisor's verification of job descriptions of the employee who requested ADA. Department of Transportation had expectations due to lack of reliable approval signatures. During the pandemic, DoD HR did not have an application such as Nitro to sign and approve ADA applications. DoD at that time used Adobe, but the Adobe did not include the signature function. Also, it only allowed DoD supervisor to type their names on functional capability assessment forms without signature for 4 out of 8 employees selected for review. We requested email communications between DoD HR supervisors and applicants to evidence approval. However, DoD HR was not able to provide those emails due to emails not meeting for more than 90 days. Therefore, we were not able to verify the validity of the signatures, and lack of signatures is exceptions. Next slide, please. Finding 2 is related to DPW. DPW FMLA files are not restricted to DPW HR staff responsible for FMLA. DPW HR logs file cabinets that keep ADA documents, but they do not log files cabinet that contain FMLA documents. Cabinets for FMLA documents are in the hallway within the DPW HR office. DPW HR office entrance is secured, so FMLA cabinets cannot be accessed by visitors. However, this method of securing the files will not apply to others with access to the office, example, maintenance. Additionally, 13 of 15 or 87% of DPW HR personnel who do not have business purpose or FMLA information can access the FMLA files. So our recommendation is to secure both FMLA and ADA files. That concludes my presentation, and I will be happy to take any questions if you may have.
Thank you so much, Deputy Auditor. At this time, are there any questions for members of the board? Not Mr. Comptroller? No? No, there aren't any questions or concerns. Thank you so much for your presentation. This report will be listed as noted.
Thank you.
Another HRs.
I'm so sorry, Director Herbert. I keep trying to rush us through, and it's so unfair. We have the HR Director here to present on their response. So,
thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, honorable board members.
Blame that on my head, not my heart.
Absolutely, absolutely. I actually appreciate the expediency. The FMLA and ADA processes and implementation or operationalizing the policies within the agencies are the responsibilities of the agencies themselves. DHR worked in concert with law to develop the policies. We also I'm proud to say that in 2020, all of those guidance documents that we have with relation to those policies for HR practitioners were placed on a SharePoint site which all HR practitioners have access to. We also implemented weekly Monday huddle meetings with all of the HR practitioners across the enterprise, where we provide additional guidance and training with respect to applying these policies. However, this highlights, the issue where we don't have a standardized or centralized process for a function that should take place the same way in every agency, right? With that, we did reach out, do some outreach with the agencies. There were some specific findings with respect to the agencies that have been corrected. For example, with the Department of Public Works, they have since secured the file cabinets. Only the 2 HR practitioners that handle the ADA and FMLA processes have keys to those file cabinets. So that has been corrected. With respect to DOT, they have since purchased Nitro, and they have the software, so when an employee submits that request electronically, they now have the capability to secure electronic signatures and document them. And with BPD, I've worked with Deputy Commissioner Briscoe. She has been working with my team. They have developed a pretty robust corrective action plan to make sure that they are getting all of the documentation that is necessary when BPD employees put in requests for either FMLA leave or an ADA accommodation. With that, I will also say that the agencies have all committed to doing internal audits of their processes at certain points throughout the year to make sure that when they have employees who are out on either federally protected leave or under an accommodation, that they have the documentation in place so that they can self-correct throughout the year, as opposed so that in future audits that will be reflected of their corrective actions. And with that, I would submit on what we submitted to the auditor's office, and if there are any questions.
Thank you. At this time, are there any questions or concerns from members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, truly appreciate your time, Director Herbert. Again, this report will be noted. The next item on the non-routine agenda can be found on page 11, SB 221004, Department of Finance. And this request is to approve an insurance policy renewal by Chubb and AXA XL Insurance Companies. On behalf of the Department of Finance, we have, I see Bob Senemy.
Yes,
Are you going to be the presenter? Or?
Actually, I'm going to turn it over. Sean K. Stanley is on the call.
Thank you,
remotely.
Deputy CFO Sean Casely. Sean K. You,
Sean K. Good morning, everyone.
Please announce yourself,
Yes.
Ms. Stanley.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Please announce yourself.
Good morning. This is Sean K. Stanley, and I'm the Deputy Chief of the Bureau of Risk Management within the Department of Finance. I am speaking on behalf of the non-routine item that is on the agenda. Again, we are here, Comptroller Henry, we did speak about this last time regarding the items coming on the agenda later. And it's the same issue as before. It's based on when we get the renewals, based on our renewal dates, and the schedule of the board meetings. So it's not an intentional act that we are just intentionally coming to the board late with these late items, but it's just that the schedules and the renewal dates do not coordinate. We are working in a proactive manner to create a system so that we can actually get some of the information earlier, but it's just a timing issue where the cycles just don't coincide with one another. So I do apologize for this and having to come back again, but we will continue to have this issue. I request that we do, if your office can get with our office in finance and we schedule a meeting just to talk about some processes that bring this through differently so we don't have to continue to come and ask for forgiveness, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Deputy Stanley. At this time, I think there's some questions from our comptrollers. Mr. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. So just to be clear, our concern was not that this insurance policy wasn't coming before us to be renewed at the same time as the others. That wasn't the issue. We understand that they have different renewal. That we have different ending dates, and we're going to be approving stuff over the course of the year. That's cool. It was the bigger question was, and just to make sure I understand how risk management goes about this, we have a broker, and they go out and they identify insurance providers for the city.
That is correct.
And so in the case of, for example, the cybersecurity, they go out and they submit our need to a whole bunch of different potential vendors, and then, you know, whoever responds back that they're interested, then they do a selection process and make a recommendation to risk management. Is that correct?
That is correct. Our insurance broker will send the applications out to various insurance carriers. And based on the assessment of our product, based on the assessment of our organization, they will decide if they want to quote the risk or they're declining it. Unfortunately, just due to the state of the cyber market right now, and of course, we're still held accountable for this data breach from several years ago, carriers have declined it, and there were 33 carriers who declined it. The incumbent stayed on the risk, which is AXA and Chubb. They stayed on the risks.
Yeah, okay, so one of the things we were curious about was, did that set of 35 total, did that represent all of the potential insurers available, such that there was no one else to ask? That was weird. Like, is that everybody in the field, or was that just the 35 that broker sends everything to all the time?
So that's that's indicative of the 35 that writes cyber for municipalities. And so they send it out to a mass market. So just a little more context, Willis Towers Watson is a huge organization. So they work with pretty much all of the top insurance companies within the United States and abroad. So they send it out to an entire group of insurers, and they decline or accept based on just the climate of the market and what we are doing here and within the city.
And we noted that there's a 38% increase in our premium. Can you talk a little bit about the state of the cybersecurity insurance market that explains why the rate is going up so much and the deductible is so high?
So right now, the insurance market is what we call a hard market. And it's hardened over time because of the pandemic and everyone working from home. And so insurance companies the market typically changes based on the overall pool of how the insurance industry is looking. So as we know, schools are having data breaches. Even some of the cybersecurity companies are experiencing breaches or hacks. And so what's happening is carriers are now paying out more money for claims than they're actually taking in. So they're taking a harder market, increasing deductibles, lowering limits, and of course, tripling in some instances the cost of the premium, just so that they can pay out into the pool of insurers that they have.
And then the last question I had was from either the insurers themselves, the broker, or from risk management, are there any recommendations to the rest of the city on what we could be doing to lower these costs?
So yes, actually, our insurance broker has suggested that we do some tabletop exercises with our agencies and with BSIT, so that they can understand what mechanisms and different processes that they need to put in place. Now, let me say this: BSIT has done an awesome job. Since I've been here almost 3 years, they've done a great job in improving their firewall security systems. But of course, there's always room for improvement, right? And so if there's a way that we can do some tabletop exercises so that agencies, especially these quasi-agencies that have different email exchanges, can understand how it impacts us, it would be great, because that would then help to lower the market, because we can strengthen our firewalls and our systems.
Okay. Ms. Stanley, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Deputy Stanley. Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. This time, are there any additional questions or concerns? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and probably seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. The next item on non-routine agenda can be found on page 89, SB 23-10211, Law Department Settlement Agreement and Release. This request is to approve a settlement agreement and release of a lawsuit filed by Robin Harris, who was involved in a car accident with a city employee, Mr. Emmanuel Edie, on behalf of the Law Department. We have the Deputy Solicitor. Mr. Solicitor, the floor, Mr. Deputy Solicitor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Council President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, members of the board. The Law Department is requesting approval of a settlement agreement in the amount of $75,000 in the case of Robin Harris v. Emmanuel Edie. Just to give a quick background of the facts, on May 21, 2019, the plaintiff, Robin Harris, was driving westbound on Preston Street near North Charles Street. A city DOT driver was driving a dump truck in the adjacent lane. After passing North Charles Street on Preston, the DOT driver veered into Miss Harris's lane and struck her Honda Accord. Miss Harris's car was badly damaged, and she was taken to the ER at Hopkins, where she received treatment for pain in her left shoulder, her spine, head, and left elbow. An MRI would later reveal a rotator cuff tear, which required arthroscopic surgery, along with extensive physical therapy. As for liability, the DOT driver had claimed at the time that he had swerved to avoid a parked car that was opening its passenger door. However, at the deposition, he was unable to provide an accurate description of the vehicle during his deposition. Ultimately, we felt like the facts were going to show that the city's driver was at fault in the accident. Moreover, the plaintiff was 59 years old, who works with disabled adults at the Arc of Maryland, and we felt it would present particularly sympathetic. This, coupled with the indisputable facts of the much larger dump truck colliding with her much smaller vehicle, led us to pursue settlement negotiations. The original demand was for $125,000. We were able to reach a settlement agreement in the amount of $75,000. And lastly, I just wanted to make the point, because I know we get this question. As far as remediation, the driver was not fined and did not have his driving privileges revoked. However, he did receive a letter of reprimand on his file. And I would just note that, you know, the city does have an older sort of administrative manual policy about reporting accidents, but the city and the administration, under work started under the former CAO, has been convening an accident review panel to review the possibility of a more comprehensive solution for disciplining drivers that cause preventable accidents. This would need to be negotiated with DHR and the Labor Commissioner, but the Law Department is participating in those discussions, and that work is progressing.
Thank you, Deputy Solicitor. At this time, Mr. Comptroller.
First of all, I want to congratulate you for hitting every single one of the questions that I had in advance. The only thing I will add is could you please keep us involved in the progress of that work group, because I'm very interested in seeing what you guys come up with in terms of administrative manual recommendations.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. I know, we're just pulling your chain. Are there any other questions or concerns from members of the board?
Mr. Comptroller, I taught him well. You know, he knows what to do.
Thank you. At this time, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item's approved. The next item on non-routine can be found on page 156, SB 22-10085, Department of Public Works. This request is to approve an infrastructure maintenance and service award to R.E. Harrington Plumbing and Heating Incorporated. A protest was received by Metro Industries. However, they did not bid on this, so we'll allow them an opportunity to speak later if they would like. At this time, we have DPW. If you guys want to walk us through this item quickly.
Good morning.
Hello.
Mr. City Council President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, Madam Solicitor, and Director Mitchell, Janine Maxwell, Deputy General Counsel for DPW. I will address, this is Water Contract 1412, is that correct? Protest submitted by Metro Industries?
Yeah, correct. 10085.
If it's okay, I'd like to address also sanitary contract 1027, the very same.
I think that's going to have to be called separately.
Separately, okay, no problem. Metro Industries did submit a protest However, DPW's argument before the board is that the protest is not proper. BOE regulations on protests, that's Section 2, paragraph D as in dog 2, requires that a protest be directly and specifically affected by a pending matter or decision of the board. That's directly and specifically affected. In order to be considered proper, the City Council President has the authority to make this determination. If a board member requests a consideration of said determination, a majority vote among board members will make that final decision. Metro submitted the basis for their protest for Water Contract 1412 is the same argument they advanced in 2 protests last year. One on Water Contract 1285, that was done on March 2nd, 2022, and again on Water Contract 1252, that was done on April 20th, 2022. That argument is essentially, if Metra and bidders do not have access to DPW's deliberative process, when they are deciding, contemplating who the contract awardee should be, that unless bidders are brought into that process, made aware of that process, then they don't know how to place bids. They cannot prevent, placing unbalanced bids, and the board should not award future contracts until or unless that information or that process is shared. Metra, in the event of Water Contract 1285, Metra pursued outside litigation in order to resolve that issue, and it was resolved by outside litigation. The board was not involved then and should not be involved now, particularly, again, in light of the fact that Metra did not submit bids on this contract. They are even further removed from it in advancing the same argument. So DPW would ask that the board find that it's not proper and should not be heard.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions or concerns for DPW at this time? Hearing none, I will allow Ari Harrington or representatives to speak on behalf.
Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, and other members of the board. I apologize. My name is Robert DeShiel. I represent R.E. Harrington. I really have little to add. They didn't bid. I don't think you should have heard anything from them at all. I think that Metra is trying to make a mockery of this process, and I would seriously consider other measures. But that's all I have. With me is my company president, owner Robert Harrington. I don't know whether Rob has anything to add.
No, I agree with Mr. DeShields. I think Metra really needs to be barred from Baltimore City from bidding on projects, my opinion. So, and again, he's a habitual offender for the MBE WB program. So I think some serious actions need to be taken against Metra Industries.
Thank you so much for your participation today.
Yes, sir.
And now we don't have a formal protest because, again, they weren't a bid, and we heard from our solicitor.
So move.
Well, I was going to allow them a minute or so to speak. Are you guys okay with that?
Oh, I was just
Are they here? Are they on? Is anybody here from Metro?
make a motion to approve, Mr. President.
Well, there's a motion on the floor. We don't, they're not even here anyway, so it's not a formal protest. Just make sure the record is right. Just so everybody's on the same page in the room. There's a motion. It's been properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Say aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. I would like to note that I abstain on this particular vote. So that has it 4 in the affirmative, 0 nay, and 1 abstention, including myself, being City Council President Nick Mosby. So that item is approved. And then the next item is found on page 157 and 158, SB 221077. Department of Public Works. This request is to approve an infrastructure maintenance and service award to Spinello Companies. A protest was also received by Metra, and I assure you that we'll hear the same presentation that we just heard prior. Is that accurate? Well, you could provide us a little more of a summary of it, and then I think the board will be okay.
A little more of a summary. Well, I'm not sure if I'm joined by Chief Tim Wolf of the DPW Office of Engineering and Construction, if he can hear me.
Mr. Wolf, are you on for DPW?
Yes, I'm on. Tim Wolf.
Okay. It is the same presentation, Mr. President, that Metra did not submit a bid on this contract either. They advanced in the same argument they did on last year, March and April. again, it's not properly before the board and should not be considered. But if you had additional technical questions about the contract itself, I'm going to defer to Mr. Wolf, Chief Wolf.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Are there any questions or concerns for DPW at this time?
No, but I would like to make a motion to approve, Mr. President.
And I like second.
There's a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The motion carries. This item is approved. And I believe that sums up today. So there is no new business before the desk of the Board of Estimates. We will adjourn at this time. The next regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Estimates will occur on Wednesday, February the 15th at 9 a.m. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in today. Baltimore, please stay safe, and we absolutely love you.
Hi, Charm TV. We're ready. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Estimates bid opening for February 1st, 2023. I am Celeste Amato. I'm the clerk of the Board of Estimates. By my colleagues in the Board of Estimates Administrative Office, Jalen Sanders, Audrey Quarles, and Sherelle Hoff. This morning we have a few addenda to announce. First up, for procurement, RFQ 000122 system. This item is now scheduled to be opened on February 15th, 2023. We also have another from procurement, RFQ 000155, fiber optic cable installation maintenance and repair services. This item 15th, 2023. And finally, Public Works WC 1327 chlorine handling safety improvement. This item will now be opened on March 1st, 2020. Today we have two bids to open, and first up is a bid Bureau of Procurement, RFQ 0109 air purification unit.
First up is ACCO Brands USA LLC. And the amount is for, one moment. And the amount is for $488,970.06.
And 6 cents. Come on, to repeat that number back, 488,970.06.
Yes, that is correct.
And Audrey is confirming that's AACO Brands USA LLC.
Yes.
$488,970.06.
Original and free.
Thank you very much.
The next one we have is Yala Ventures Inc. for $384,500, 0 cents.
That number was 384,500.00. And that was Yala Ventures Inc., $384,500.
Yes.
Jalen, do you see an address for that company?
The address is 5507 North 2nd Place. So 2 Indy Place. The city is Phoenix, state is Arizona, and the zip code is 85012.
Thanks. And do we have more than one copy with their original?
Yes, you have an original plus three.
Okay, hold on to that. And let's, is that coming ahead of the other stack?
This is the one you were just working on.
Yalla. Oh, you mean a doing business as?
Yes.
Let's add that to the public posting. Yalla, just to clarify for folks watching, Yalla Ventures Inc. has, like many companies do, multiple business names. So you'll see when we post these bids that we will also include any other doing business as names they may have.
So that's an original plus three.
Got it. Next up.
Okay. The next up is Pre-OPCO LLC for $147,933.40.
Okay, I'm going to repeat that number back,
Business as.
and then I'm going to repeat that name back to you to make sure I have it spelled right, Jalen, on this form. Pardon me. The dollar amount was 147,933.40.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so, and I think the company is spelled P-R-E.
Space OPCO, comma, LLC.
Is that all caps?
Yes, that's all caps.
OPCO, Pre-OPCO LLC.
Yes, and just to note, they also have an alternative business name in which they do business under.
So you need to put that doing business as Pure Wellness.
Pre-OPCO, okay, so that bid was from Pre-OPCO LLC, doing business also as Pure Wellness. Amount was $147,933.40.
Yes, that is correct.
Is that the same one? Okay, so this one has, make sure, has an original plus 4.
And we have 4 copies. Thank you. Up next, Jalen.
Thank you. Up next is it's a difficult name to pronounce, so pardon me if I please mispronounce it. Molecule, and the amount is for $695,400.00. Molecule.
Could you say the amount again, please? I'm sorry.
$695,400.
Okay. That number was 695,400.00.
Yes.
And the company name, can you just straight up spell it?
Yes. MOLEKULE.
And is that all one word or is 2
Yes,
words?
it's
all one word.
a play on molecule. Yes.
MOLEKULE, all one word.
Yes.
So that bidder was a Molecule, and the bid amount was $695,400.
Yes.
I need to say, 'cause it's the only one. Hold on. 695. Okay, just an original.
Just an original? Okay, thank you. Okay.
Ready for the next one? The next one is from Prospectus Enterprises, Inc., and that is for $482,250.00.
Jalen, would you repeat that number one more time, please?
$482,250.00.
That number was 482,250.00.
Yes.
And that bidder was Prospectus Enterprises, Inc.
Yes.
$482,250.
An original plus 3.
Thanks, Audrey. Okay. Up next.
The next one is from Citron Hygiene US Corp., and the amount is $605,475.00.
That number was 605,475.00.
Yes.
And that bidder was Citron Hygiene US Corp., $605,475.
Yes.
And that's an original plus 3.
Thanks, Audrey. And next.
The next one is Wind, and the amount is for $62,050.
Okay, let me repeat that number back to you, make sure I got that right. 62,032.50.
Yes, and that's Wind Technologies.
How do you spell wind?
WYND.
Okay. Wind Technologies, Inc., and their number was $62,032.50.
They're not an ink. They're not an ink.
Okay.
That's an original plus 2.
Thank you. And
Just read the name that's on the envelope, please.
And then we have one from Stop Wellness for You. One Stop Wellness for You. That's the name of the company.
okay.
Don't read anything.
Yeah, this, and to explain to everybody what is happening, we have a bid from One Stop Wellness for You, and we need to turn this bid over to the Department of Law for review, so that they can discern the format that we received. So we will not be sharing their bid number at this time. This will be referred to the Law Department for review. Do we have more than one copy of that one?
We just have one.
Okay, and that just has an original. Okay, great. I believe that was the last bid.
Now you have the price, now you have the technical.
For, no, I mean for that. So that was the last bid for RFQ 000109. And up next, we'll be opening a bid for the Bureau of Procurement, contract number B50006470, Management of the Taxi Card Services Program. This is an opening of price proposals.
Okay, are we ready?
I'm ready when you are.
Okay, the first bid is from Creative Software Solutions LLC, and it is for $1,373,400.00.
Okay, that number was 1,373,400.00.
Yes.
And that is Creative Software Solutions, and it appears they also do business as MJM Innovations.
Right. And it's a LLC after Creative Software
That's Creative
Solutions.
Software Solutions, $1,373,400.
That's correct. So it's an original and one copy.
And do we have any other bidders for this item?
No.
Nope.
So that was our only bid received for contract number B50006470, Management of the Taxi Card Services Program. And unless anybody tells me otherwise, I believe that was our final opening for today. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Our next bid opening is on February 15th, 2023 at noon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, team.